Stand clear of the closing doors, please.
I don't know if you guys remember, but a few months ago I was like, bibliophobia, this is a book that scares me. I don't like that she can't read all of a sudden. That sounds like my worst nightmare. I would never want to experience that. Proceeds to immediately experience that. I have fallen into the slumpiest slump for like 2, 3, 4 months. It was crazy. I could not read a thing. I do feel like I'm crawling my way out of it very slowly, although Love Island has consumed my every waking thought, and so I have lost some progress, but I digress. Some of the books that I have read recently are some of my favorites of the year. So let's just dive in. The first book I have is Madonna in a Fur Coat by Sabahattin Ali. This was published in 1943 in Turkish and is translated by Maureen Freely and Alexander Daw. This novel unspooled me a little bit. This is a story about this man, Raif. When we first meet Raif, he's working in this like office translating documents, and he's very unstimulable and passive and sort of allows life to steamroll him. You sort of wonder, like, how does a person end up like that? The narrator and Raif strike up a friendship when Raif becomes ill, and Raif gives him his journal. And in his journal, he recounts his falling in love with this woman. Back in the day, he moved to Berlin. He would visit this museum and he saw this portrait of this woman, and he was totally taken by the portrait, so much so that every day he would visit the museum to sit in front of the portrait. One day, someone sits next to him and sort of calls him out, and it was like, I have observed you come here every day. They sort of talk about it. He later realizes that the person who had come to speak to him had been the subject of the portrait. And so we see these two people sort of explore love with each other, explore being the subject and object of desire, what it means to own yourself, what it means to love somebody, what it means to see somebody. And I just really like the questions that it had around love. There's this beautiful intimacy that forms between them. And it's interesting because there's no physical intimacy, but I think this idea of just like speaking about every facet of life, every major idea of life, especially the idea of love. And it's really interesting because from the beginning, we realize that this woman who is the subject of a portrait and is sort of presented initially as this thing to be consumed is very against the idea of possession in her real life. Her ideas around love really focus around the idea of maintaining her personhood for herself. It's interesting because then she's sort of interrogating her connection to Raif, and she's like, well, I feel this closeness to you and I feel this emotional intimacy with you, but I don't feel like the passion and the chemistry and all of that. So what is love without that? Does love exist without that? So she's sort of asking herself these questions, and he's sort of challenging her. Interesting because the reason that the woman allows Raif to have this friendship with her is because of this perceived devotion, but she also like does not want to be an object of devotion. She just wants to belong to herself. So these characters are very real and they're very contradictory, which I always love. I think it just asked a lot of questions of me that made me spiral, and I always appreciate a book that can do that. I think they were both kind of erroneous, or I guess not erroneous, but like I didn't agree with their stances on love. It also made me like ask all my friends like, hey, what does love mean to you? Because I don't think I know. Because I think like sometimes the characters would explore something and I'd be like, yeah, you're approximating what I think love is. But yeah, it just made me kind of ask myself that question, hear what other people have to say. I think sometimes we sort of like concretize the zeitgeisty idea of love, but to ask yourself what it really does mean to be in love. Ask your friends that, ask strangers that. I think it's a good question. I saw a TikTok about a woman who had a journal and would like ask people to write advice in that journal. And I'm thinking of doing this, but asking people what love means to them and like collecting people's responses, because I'm very curious about this. I think for this book, if you have read Woman at Point Zero, Nawal El-Sadawi, I think the writer was, I will put a picture here, but it's very similar. I think something to just remember is that this was published in 1948, but it's pretty badass. Like she has a pretty badass opinion about ownership and possession for a woman in 1948, and I think it's like the bubblings of sort of breaking away from just what it means to traditionally be in partnership with someone. So yeah, I would pair those two books together, but this was beautiful. The ending fucked me up. The ending was really sad. But yeah, I enjoyed being with Raif and the lady he's in love with in this one. The next book I read was Big Beautiful Life by the Queen, Emily Henry. I actually really like this one. This one sort of catapulted its way to number 2 for me in terms of like the M. Hen universe. This was about 2 writers who were working on this biography about this woman. She is like from this famous family. She was married to a pop star, whatever. So they are both essentially competing in creating the biography. So they're each interviewing the woman on different days and writing a biography. And at the end, she would like pick the person who she wanted to write their biography. That's not a correct sentence. Who she wanted to write the biography. So initially it's like one very established writer and then the other writer works for like a not as prestigious writing outlet. She's very much sunshine, he's very much grumpy, and I love them. I love them together. I really liked their chemistry. I really liked watching Hayden become this mushy ball of love. It was my favorite thing. And it's funny because in the beginning I was like, I don't care about this like secondary story with Margaret. And then it got crazy. And then cults were introduced. I was fully sat for this. It was so good. I think the story was really good. And I think my one qualm with Emily Henry is that I think her books are either very like sentimental and mushy, which I can't really stomach, or they're like not spicy enough. Like I feel like Funny Story was not as memorable for me because it was not super spicy. It was just fine. But I felt like this struck a perfect balance of like giving us a good story, giving us a lot of spice, giving us really good chemistry between the 2 main characters. And I don't know, I feel like when I read Emily Henry, my brain is generally off. So I don't know if maybe the plot twists were very obvious, but to me, I was mouth agape while I was reading it. It was a really fun audiobook listen, and I really enjoyed my time with it. For right now, I think my top 3 are People We Meet on Vacation, No One Will Ever Dethrone That Baby. Then we have Big Beautiful Life. I'm not sure what my third is. Maybe Book Lovers. I don't know. It's just those 2 for me. We read Outline by Rachel Cusk. I have been wanting to read this book for the longest time, and I don't know why I've been putting it off. I think as I've been like moving through time, aging, I have been thinking about like my literary taste, and I have been wondering if I maybe need more plot in my books. I feel like she scared me, and I remember when I read Second Place, I was like very hooked and like I couldn't stop reading it, and I really enjoyed the experience. And I don't know why then I was scared to like move to the Outline trilogy, but I remember like always thinking like, oh, I should pick this up, and then always feeling like this latent fear about how plotless her work is. But she just explores and creates tension while subverting the idea of a novel so well. I read this, and then I read 2 essays. I read a New Yorker piece on Cusk and a New York Times piece on Cusk. Oh, I should actually get my iPad because I have some notes. But essentially this is about a woman who is going to Athens to teach like a writing course. In her transit to Athens, she encounters a lot of people and she has a lot of conversations. And in these conversations, we begin to explore motherhood, we begin to explore divorce, we begin to explore the myths that uphold our lives and what happens when we realize that those myths are myths. Some ideas about writing, ideas about being a reader. This was a book about ideas, and it was all told from a narrator who was very like nebulous. You felt her in the text as like a vehicle to just like eavesdrop, which is like my favorite. And I think this was less directive to like women talking, but it felt very much like Women Talking by Miriam Taves to me because of the nature of a novel being ideas explored through conversation. Like I really enjoy that. I think in having a narrator who is so undefined, she really allowed for all of this like grit and detail to fill the page and fill the space in what she was exploring. I thought it was fantastic. So I think this was the piece in the New York Times. There was a quote that I really liked that said, "By freeing the narrator of a body, the novel allows readers to accept a more complex portrait of a person, a self instead of a set of gender stereotypes. The result is a heartbreaking portrait of poise, sympathy, regret, and rage, and with this book, Cusk suggests a powerful alternate route for an autobiographical novel." Like I flew through this. I couldn't really stop reading it. And the thing that I liked about it was that it pushed against a lot of the ideas that we have about novels. It was really interesting because I just had book club for the next book that I'm going to talk about. And we were talking about what makes a good story and what makes a good novel. There were sort of 2 camps where some were saying that like a story must have like a traditional arc and it must have a resolution. Another camp that was saying like, we don't necessarily need a resolution. We don't necessarily need a story. Something without a plot can be equally interesting if the ideas and themes you're exploring are being explored well. And I think that like what Cusk does is an example of how you can have a story. Like, I felt so much tension in this, and I felt that there was something that I could follow. There was like a thread that was leading me through the text. It didn't feel disorganized. There was propulsion. There were also all of these ideas that were explored in a really beautiful way. So I think she's like such a master at this ability to subvert what is really, really traditional. Something that I was thinking was like, I think we often think of novels as being like plot driven or being character driven. And so what happens when you don't have a lot of overt plot, but then you also don't have, you have characters, but it's not really a character study. It's more a dialogue as a vehicle through which to explore different ideas. And I feel like, I don't know, like you could also achieve the same thing through like a philosophical text, but it's just so human to experience it through eavesdropping, which is what this felt like. Because I feel like I always want to learn ideas refracted through experience, as opposed to like, I don't know, in a maybe philosophical text, it's just the idea for the sake of the idea in maybe too abstract a way. I like the idea of being able to explore these things in conversation and dialogue without necessarily needing like a ton of characterization to funnel or drive these ideas. I don't know. So there was one piece where he was talking to this writer and they said, there comes a point at which the record needs to be updated because you've shed too many links with what you were. He doesn't quite know what happened. All he knows is that he doesn't recognize himself in those stories anymore, though he remembers the bursting feeling of writing them, something in himself massing and pushing irresistibly to be born. He hasn't had that feeling since. He almost thinks that to remain a writer, he'd have to become one all over again. It's as if he can't quite remember what drove him to words in the first place, all those years before. Yet words are what he deals in. I suppose it's a bit like marriage. You build a whole structure on a period of intensity that's never repeated. It's the basis of your faith, and sometimes you doubt it, but you never renounce it because too much of your life stands on that ground. So this was an essay in the New Yorker called I Don't Think Characters Exist Anymore. And she essentially like tears a novel apart, and I loved it. It's as if she has renounced all personal agency and narrative authority. The true power lies with Cusk, who has chosen to submit her character to such radical experiment in passivity and to respond to the chatty descriptive tradition of naturalistic English novel with deliberately wrought formalism and silence. And then she talks about like even how her sentences are structured and how she sort of broke apart the idea of what a sentence should be. The interviewer asks, "You've written a number of novels in a more conventional vein, with plot and characters to whom quite clear things happened. I'm wondering why and how you struck upon this new style of writing." Cusk responds, "Essentially, I think all the problems of writing are problems of living, and all problems of creativity are problems of living. It's been here a long time, but it doesn't mean it always will be. It's that feeling of realizing that your consciousness, what appears to be your individuality, is actually resting on old, possibly decrepit structures. In my own personal experience, language structure, sentence structure, and sentence itself had this underpinning that goes unexamined. Everyone used sentences the way they drive down Fifth Avenue, because it's there, because someone decided it should be Fifth Avenue and you should go down it. The sentence, the literary sentence, came to seem a lot like that to me. This was much more a problem of living, of thinking. Why do these things inevitably happen? You enter these structures, you exist in these structures, they collapse or you leave them. Why?" I'm going to link both of the essays down below because I think like the piece was really cool, but also her ideas around like sentences and novels and characters also really, really fascinating. The last book I read was Audition by Kitamura. So this was actually like the New York Public Library has a book club, and this was their pick. So my friend was going to go to the event and she's like, "Do you want to join?" And I was like, "Yeah, I actually have an advanced reader copy. Let me just get on that," because I tried to read this one by myself and I couldn't get into it. So then I was going to join that book club. I was listening to it on audio, got like halfway through it, and I was like, I physically cannot move. Like, this is so boring to me. I can't do it. And like, full disclaimer, I read Intimacies and I absolutely loved Intimacies by her. I really liked Katie's writing, but for some reason this was not landing for me. So whatever, I put it aside. I DNF'd that. I was like, I'm over it. And then my other book club, the one that I go to that's run by Letitia, Books by LARB, picked this one for June. So I was like, okay, I feel like the universe is telling me to read this book. So I finished it on my hands and knees with every single effort that my body could exert, because I didn't get it. When I finished it, I was like, I don't really know what happened. At book club, everyone was talking about what they thought was happening, and I was like, guys, I have not a single thought. I have no idea what happened in this book. So the book is broken up into two parts. The first part, this woman, she's having breakfast with this young man who admits that he thinks she's his mother, and she's like, no, I like lost a baby, but I don't have a kid. It's not you. And then it goes to the second part where like he's her son, moves back home, and like I don't know. I'm making it sound way worse than it is. It's very interesting. I feel like you should read it, and I feel like you should read it with someone else. It is fascinating. Like, I was listening to a lot of podcasts. So I was listening to like the LARB had an interview with Katie, and so did Not Literary Friction. There's another podcast that took like a long hiatus, but they're back. They also had a conversation with Katie. And from that conversation, like, let me pull up because there were some good ideas. So she was talking about the idea of agency, like character having agency in fiction, and how that's kind of an illusion. And she was playing with this illusion, and she was playing with the idea of passivity and someone who like completely folds into narrative structures because the characters in this were actors. So I think that was interesting when she spoke about it. The idea of motherhood as a parent to someone that is a stranger. So the idea that like you can be a parent to this person and then all of a sudden have this moment where you look at this person and they seem completely unfamiliar to you. But she expands beyond just like a mother viewing their child as someone who's a stranger into like just someone who you're extremely familiar with. Like, for example, a spouse, when all of a sudden you see them engage in some way, or you see like a glimpse of something that makes them completely unfamiliar to you. That's super, super fascinating. Also, the last thing was like, there were a lot of breakfast scenes in this book. And I think we often talk about like the dinner scene, like the importance of a dinner scene. I think MFA writers talk a lot about the dinner scene, but I think that this has sort of taken the dinner scene and flipped it on its head and introduced the breakfast scene, which I think can be a lot more informative and can be a lot more tense. Like, I just watched Bonjour Tristes. I'm pronouncing that like I am from the Dominican Republic. Bonjour Tristes. But I just watched the adaptation, and they had a beautiful, beautiful breakfast scene. And I was like, this blows any dinner scene out of the water. It was so good. And I think like I was very taken by the breakfast scenes in this book as well. So those are some interesting ideas. The book club discussion around this book was also really fascinating. And as I was talking about outline and how she talks about passivity and the removal of a character and not really having a character who is like the focal point, but instead having a character who is very passive and who lacks a lot of agency be the vehicle through which you explore ideas. And I think Cusk does it so well. And I think Katie was maybe trying to approximate that. For me, the thing is that I don't mind a passive narrator. I don't mind a narrator who is allowing herself to fold into the narrative structures. I think if you want to explore ideas, which I think she was doing, because one of the ideas that were thrown at book club, which I really like, and I think if anything, hold on to this and then decide if you want to read the book or not, but one of the ideas that I thought was really interesting was the idea that in the first half of the book, the narrator doesn't have a child. There is this sense of something missing in her life, and there is this lack of something in her life. And then in the second part, she does have a child, and she feels the same thing. So no matter which side of the coin you land on, whether you do end up being a mother or you don't end up being a mother, there is still this like discontent, and there is still this lack of agency in one's life. I think that's a fascinating premise. The ideas that this brought up is that like, can you have a novel of just ideas? Can you have a novel where you don't have a resolution to the thing? Can like the idea or like the central idea of ambiguity be the driving force? And I think it can. I think you can totally have a novel of just ideas if it's done well. I think maybe it's the marriage of like passivity and ambiguity. But I'm curious because apparently this has caused a lot of ripples in the water and a lot of people have dissenting opinions about it. Like, some people were passionately supporting this book, and I love that. I didn't really vibe with that book. I read some essays. So the first essay was an essay by Nolan. She wrote an essay called My Friendships Are My Life, AI Could Never Compete. And it was just talking about how a lot of people have turned to AI as a placeholder for friendship. And she talks about how the main quality of AI is this like sycophantism. Is that the word? I said that with a lot of confidence. Hold on. I have only experienced this word in reading.
Sycophant.
I think it's sycophantism. So yeah, she talks about sycophantism and the over-agreeableness of AI and how like having something that is so cloyingly positive towards you can be a little bit unsettling. I really like this quote that she had in it where she says, "The friendships that have defined my life have taught me this. A friend you can't give back to is not a friend at all." There's also an essay on Substack called Erotic Decisions, which I thought was really interesting. She says, "Life doesn't begin at birth. It begins in earnest at the moment of trembling recognition. When something stirs beneath reason, when you want something or someone without being able to explain why. Without being able to explain why, you choose to move forward. That is an erotic decision." And it's basically looking at how when we stay within the parameters of what is safe, nothing is really yielded, nothing is really discovered or explored in a meaningful way, and how we really should make efforts to move towards the things that like make us tingle and wake us up, and just like moving towards our curiosities with a little bit more intention. We are often kind of told to take the safe route. I think we're often conditioned to take the safe route, or like the ability to take risks is sort of like beat out of us. She does a lot to sort of remind us toward risk and how important risk is in your creative life, in all of life. I like this quote here where she says, "From a young age, we are encouraged to prioritize strategy over spontaneity, prudence over passion. We are told to plan our lives, manage our time, brand our personalities. Desire in this framework is a liability, too wild, too messy, too inefficient. But what use is a life composed entirely of safe decisions, if none of them ever stir the soul? The tragedy of many lives is that they were never felt, not that they were too short. They were never chosen, only followed." So in sum, the erotic life is a life that is risky, saying yes to the conversation that scares you, writing the damn book, saying I love you before it's safe. We should do it, you know? Author chats. I went to see Catherine Lacey have a conversation with, what's this lady's name? Whose name? Splinters. Leslie Jameson. It was really interesting to hear about like her process with writing a book. If you guys don't know, Catherine Lacey just came out with a book, and it is a fiction and nonfiction, kind of flip the book, and you can sort of decide which side you want to read first. She was talking about how she didn't feel embarrassed about anything that she was writing, because the thing that you realize as you get older is that everyone has been through it. And so there's nothing really shocking about anyone's experience, because like the sort of nugget of human experience is that we're all going to feel shame and embarrassment and like do things that are out of pocket. So like it's okay to share them because it's very human and everyone has experienced it. So I really like that. And this idea of like humiliation, like even if you think something is very humiliating, like there is someone in a room who has also experienced that thing. You're not alone. Like I mentioned before, I saw Bonjour Tristesse. It's this movie about this father and this daughter who are spending their summer in France, in the south of France. The father has a girlfriend, but the father is widowed, right? So his wife has died. That's the girl's mother. And the girl's mother's best friend, does that make sense? The mother's friend comes to spend some time with them, and then the dad eventually like gets with his dead wife's best friend. It's messy, but then also the young girl is like exploring her sexuality and exploring her agency, not just in that relationship, but what it means to be like a young woman and have agency when all of these things feel out of her control. Yeah, it's like a coming of age story. I want to go back and read the book because there were some parts that were so astute. I wondered how much of it was Durga, because Durga Chubos was the film director of this. And actually at the premiere, she and Lily, who is the young girl, were having like a Q&A, which was really cool to experience. I've never heard Durga or like been in the same room as Durga. And she's like one of my favorite writers. Too Much and Not the Mood was like one of my favorite things. It is one of my favorite things that like exists. So it was really cool to like experience her in real life. I kind of blacked out a little bit. But yeah, it was a beautiful movie. The shots in that movie were so Durga coded. Like if you've read Too Much and Not the Mood, you know that Durga zooms in on like these really intimate moments, and that's what the entire movie felt like. It was the most stunning thing. I really enjoyed it. It's a great summer movie too. Music. I went to Boston and I met up with Ivana and Kat, and we went to go see Hozier in concert. It was the hottest day in Boston. It was 100 degrees outside, 101. We all had tummy issues the day of, so we all had to like reroute our plans to tend to our aching tummies. I think we were all anxious because there were heat advisories. We were on Reddit. This girl said that her grandfather and her dad died of a heat stroke. I didn't want to die, but I did really want to see Hozier. I was concerned for him. I was like, we're gonna see Calf. Like he's absolutely not gonna go on in his typical Hozier attire because it's 102 degrees outside. But he did. He showed us a little bit of wrist, which was very risque for our Victorian queen. But yeah, he was fully covered. I don't know what he's hiding. The concert was amazing. It was incredible. I couldn't stop thinking about it. On the way back from the Amtrak, I just like looked longingly out the window while playing the Hozier soundtrack, and name a better experience. Like there is none. So that was incredible. A creator that I have really been enjoying is Anna Howard from the Wild Geese podcast. She had like a previous season where she would interview people, and then she sort of transitioned to having these episodes where she talks about, I don't know, her deep dives and her rabbit holing. The video that blew up was her video on digital gardening, having a way to take notes in a way that allows you to connect all of the different things that you are consuming in a way that is webbed. And I think I've been talking about like following your curiosity and seeing like what are the things that interest you that lead to other things. But I hadn't really yet, like, I think I was in my brain trying to like make all these connections, but she like provided a concrete way to sort of do that. So I bow down to my queen. I have also instituted cat office hours because I want to make a practice of like being able to, because I feel like I had all of these journals. Like I had a commonplace journal, which I had been kind of inconsistent with. And I was just trying to find something that I could maintain. I was really resistant to the idea of a digital journal because I was like, I feel like everything is online. But when we're thinking about like ease and implementing a thing that you can sustain, I feel like using Obsidian, which is a platform that she uses, has been really helpful. Like I have Buku notes now. I just credit her to like just being able to capture all of my thoughts and throw it into this beautiful note-taking system. Her podcast episodes, like every single one I want to take notes on because they're just so good. Yeah, she's just like a really exciting person to get to follow. I think her last podcast was about relationship hierarchies. She talks about reading, she talks about dating in New York City, and all of these things. Something that I really like about Anna, and I was talking about this with Kat, but is her commitment to a return to the way that we talk about information that we've consumed. I think that there's like this weird thing where people take ownership over other people's ideas. And I don't know if it's because I come from like an academia background, but like we should be citing our sources. And I really like that Anna is not so much interested in being the person who has presented this idea, but she is in conversation with all of these creators and is bringing all of these creators to the table to have this conversation, which then generates new ideas. And I think that piece of it is so beautiful, and I think it's like something that is lost, especially when people are trying to go like viral. When we're thinking about thinking, and when we're thinking about the generation of ideas, and when we're thinking about like learning, it's so important to be able to cite your sources and like know where your information comes from. I think that I have also fallen into the thing where it's like, oh, I think I like heard this somewhere, and I think that also comes from the fact that like we're consuming so much information so quickly, but when you slow down and you're like, oh, I got this idea from this thing I watched by this speaker, and you can just cite it. And that's pretty cool. The last thing I'll talk about is what I've been watching more consistently, which is Love Island. I feel like whenever I watch reality TV, I'm always on the search for the high that the Clementine incident gave me. Do you guys remember the Clementine incident? When Love is Blind was out with the season with Zainab, and there was a whole Clementine incident, I feel like I could write several think pieces on what happened there. I feel like I've been watching Love is Blind, and I sort of gave up on that because it became too scripted. And I've been searching high and low for something that creates the same sociological high for me. And I think I found it. And it's Love Island Season 7, Episode 26. It's been very fun to be in on the discourse with Love Island. It's tested a lot of my friendships. It has tested my ability to handle bullshit. I keep saying like this last episode was like really good literary fiction because all of the people that I was adamantly like not backing up, I was agreeing with and clapping for, and it's only a good book that makes me do that. I like a character that makes me question my decisions, and there are a lot of them on Love Island. If we're thinking of these people, I know they're real people, but if we're thinking of these people as characters, it's like excellent literary fiction. So on that note, please let me know what you have been reading. Is it good? Should I pick it up too? And yeah, I'm excited to continue chatting this summer. See you soon.